Good afternoon, good morning, good evening to everyone who's joining us on today's GMAT Club live resume review call. Happy to have you here. My name is Greg Guglielmo. I'm the founder of Avanti Prep, which is an MBA admissions consulting firm. I myself did my MBA at UC Berkeley Haas School of Business, what is now, feels like yesterday, but is now several or many years ago. Since then have worked with applicants around the world, into the hundreds now and probably into the thousands in terms of numbers of schools. So have experience with a variety of profiles, and hopefully we can translate that into some live and actionable conversations today around the four candidates on the screen here: Cheshta, Daniel, Kartik, and Borjan. And hopefully while those comments and feedback will be specific to the individuals who have been kind enough to put themselves out there and have their resumes discussed on this conversation, hopefully what you all hear, and for the other folks who are dialed in, hopefully what you all hear and glean from that can be helpful or relevant to you as well. What we're going to do to start is go around the group here, Cheshta, Daniel, Kartik, and Borjan, just to provide a little bit of like a 1-minute background or intro about themselves. We'll then come back and go through each candidate. I believe their resumes will be up on the screen and we could have a live conversation about that. They'll pose some questions. I'll offer thoughts and we'll have some fun with that and hopefully some impact as well. So without further ado, thank you again for everyone for joining. We'll pass it over to Cheshta for a little bit of an introduction.
Hi everyone, my name is Cheshta. So I did my undergraduate in commerce / business. I completed it in 2017 from Delhi University. Post that, I joined a management consulting firm and I've been working there for the past 3 years. And now I feel like is the time that I should start applying to BSchools, and I hopefully plan on applying towards 3-4 schools this first round, and hope for a good result.
All right. Thank you, Cheshta. Daniel?
All right. Yeah, man, I feel old. I graduated my undergrad in 2012. So I guess that's 5 years before she did. So I graduated from one of the service academies, West Point, back in 2012. So I commissioned as an officer. So I've been active duty for a little over 8 years now. I actually flew helicopters, so Army aviation, and my commitment's up, and obviously trying to pivot careers, and that's why I'm looking to get an MBA, kind of transition from the military to the civilian world.
Great. Thank you, Daniel. Looking forward to talking through things today. Kartik?
Hi, everyone. I'm Kartik. I currently work in a clean energy firm in India. I largely deal with small to medium-sized clean tech projects. Before this, I used to work at a management consulting firm as well, and I have a graduate degree in physics from Delhi University. And I'm looking to apply to schools this year.
Great. Thank you. And Borjan?
Hi, everyone. I am Borjan. I am from Kazakhstan. I graduated like many years ago in 2012, and since then I've been working in the financial sphere. I've been working in a single bank for all of these years, and I feel that I need some to kind of change my career or propel it further. That's why I'm considering like getting an MBA.
Thank you and welcome today. Just a quick note, by the way, because a couple of you did bring up your graduation years, and trust me, if you feel old, I feel older. So don't worry too much about that. To the extent you're all considering traditional full-time, often 2-year MBA programs, if they're a couple, perhaps there are a few 1-year MBAs mixed in. Look, rest assured, if you look at any class profile page online, you'll often be able to see not only an average number of work experience years, but also a range. And a lot of times that's a middle 80% range that schools show, 10th percentile to 90th percentile. And for the most part, you're going to see at US MBA programs, you might see an average of around 5 years of work experience with a range of 3 to 7 or 3 to 8, depending on the school. And in European programs, for example, often trend a little bit older. You might see an average of 6 years and even a little bit of a wider range. I think for the most part, don't worry about that. Daniel and Borjan, you mentioned you graduated in 2012. Well, Daniel, military applicants very often do have more experience because you were, serving around the world and in a variety of positions. So don't worry about that. And Borjan, you have been accumulating and building a variety of experiences up through and including becoming head of analytics teams and so forth. So I think own those experiences. Don't worry if you're toward the kind of higher end of the range. If you feel like now is the right time for you to pursue the MBA, that's fine. I think the more important thing then in the applications is to explain why MBA and why now for you. And there'll be different opportunities to do that. So don't worry too much about that. I think this is kind of a common range to have for 2020 applicants with 2021 entry, to have, folks who graduated in 2017, like Chishta, as well as folks who graduated in 2012. That's kind of the range you'd often find in your class. So I think we have a good representation of that here, and I'm happy to answer other questions you all might have about that along the way. But as it relates to today's conversations, resume reviews, I should, by the way, I didn't mention this earlier, but for those out there interested, and of course those on the line, if anyone has questions specific to their own resumes or would like to discuss resume reviews, you can visit avantiprep.com, AVANTIPREP. It's basically the name that I think you can see there with my own name, and you could sign up for a free consultation, or there's an email address toward the bottom. Always happy to chat and personalize this conversation for anyone. But Chishta, we can start with you. We'll go in the same order. We'll pull your resume up on the screen for people's references. Some of the things here, of course, have been anonymized and so forth. To start the conversation off, do you have specific questions or concerns or things that you've been struggling with as you worked through your resume?
Yeah, so I think one of the major concerns was how I can position like the impact that I've had on projects in like the best possible way, because I think that's the main thing. Like when when you send your resume to a BSchool, I think the impact is what should shine through. So one is that. Second is just on the bucketing, on how I bucketed my resume. Is this the best way to do it, or I could probably do it in a better manner? And third is just I felt like certain sentences and all, I felt like I could be like more precise and more like to the point. I felt like some sentences were too wordy. So wanted your thoughts on it, like how to be, more concise or more precise and to the point and just get the message through.
Okay, great. Let me apologize to you guys in advance. If you see my eyes wandering from direct eye contact, I do have notes down in front of me here and are recording your questions as well as having your resumes all on my own screen too. So if my eyes wander, it's because I'm looking at notes or recording your questions. So let's take those questions, a question about impact, a question about bucketing, and a question about precision. Let's start with bucketing first, because that's almost more of a kind of macro element, kind of a feel and flow and projection. There are elements of impact in there as well. And everyone can see toward the top of your page that you've had 4 different mini titles or 4 different positions, even just within the 3+ years or 3-ish years that you've been at the consulting firm. So that is great. Just headline observation. That's fantastic. That's progression. That's advancement. That is, we hope to show, increasing responsibilities, leadership, and impact. You asked specifically about bucketing, and right now it seems like you have you've got kind of the 4 jobs all bucketed together. Then you skip a line and you've got key accomplishments. A reaction I had, an observation I had as I looked through your resume in advance of this call was specific to bucketing. And I think that the way you have it right now could be transformed, could be reconfigured. I think that you might be leaving some value on the table in terms of the upward progression and the promotions that you've had. One thing you could do and could consider is separating. I don't think you need a separate section for all 4 of the jobs, but you could bifurcate them between the associate roles and the analyst roles. So you could kind of have similar titling as you have now, where you have senior associate and junior associate with the dates. Then you have some bullets or projects specific to your associate roles beneath. Then you have the analyst titling, senior analyst and junior analyst. Then you've got kind of a mirror image. You've got other responsibilities, projects, etc., that correspond to the analyst period. And I think inherent in that, depending on how exactly and through work and through constant kind of iteration and enhancement and focus on these bullets, a reader of your resume would be able to see the upward progression. They would be able to see it at a macro level when they just glance at the page, because they would see, wow, okay, she's got a section. She's been an associate, actually 2 different roles even as an associate. And she was an analyst before that. Now, so I know that she's had 4 different roles. She's on an upward progression. The consulting firm has been promoting her. That's great. She must be doing a lot of things right now. And then when they look, so they'll see that at a macro perspective. And then when they look into the details of your projects and what you've done, they'll actually see even more of that progression. Perhaps, for example, and at a very simplistic level, if you were an analyst, as we all, right out of college, we're all doing that right out of college kind of work. I don't know, maybe what you're doing there is more analytically oriented, and there's not quite as much of the leadership and managerial or client facing. This is a total oversimplification. But then in the associate level, there is more team, project leadership, mentorship, direct client interaction. And somebody would be able, again, at a macro level, see those 2 different chunks. And then if they read the bullets, when they read the bullets more specifically, they'd observe that upward progression even more so. So that's how I would bucket. I think that the key accomplishments that you've got here could probably don't need to be a separate section. I think that they could live within the 2 sections that I just described, and they would be kind of distributed based on when they occurred. Did they occur when you were an analyst, or did they occur when you were an associate? Structurally, I do like how you have, and this is something for anyone in consulting out there who's listening in, anyone perhaps in investment banking, or anyone in a kind of a project-oriented, deal-oriented, client-oriented, engagement-oriented type of job where you go project to project, client to client. I really like, Chishta, what you've done here with, you're calling out select projects. A lot of times what we'll see on these types of resumes or CVs that I've just described is like a bold line that says selected project experience or selected client experience or selected deal experience if it's investment banking. And then you call out some of the most interesting. You don't need to put it might be, Chishta, like what you did, where you're calling out 3 or 4 of the most interesting or the most compelling clients that you worked on. So that's something for everyone to keep in mind. Not only, Chishta, it's not for every industry or every type of job. It usually lends itself more toward consulting, banking, any kind of project, deal, client-oriented. And what to do when you choose those is to think about what were the most valuable, what were the most interesting, what are the most compelling, what were the most impactful, but also how do they complement one another? Was there something particularly unique about one and particularly unique about another? Maybe one was really analytically complex. Maybe another one was very international. Maybe another one you had a bigger leadership or client-facing role, and you can therefore hit value or express different types of value in different parts of the page. So that's a lot about bucketing and structuring. If you have any follow-up questions, happy to answer them. Otherwise, we can move on to some of the other questions as well.
Yeah, so I think the major reason why I bucketed it in the manner that I have is because I felt like, since obviously adcoms receive multiple resumes, so they might not really go through each resume in much detail. So having just a key accomplishment section is something that they can, just go through and probably see like 3 or 4 big titles. Like I've mentioned, financials, like I worked in financial services, industrial goods, and also private equity. So they know that I have that experience and also like know about my key accomplishments. So that was my reason of bucketing it in this manner, because I felt like they wouldn't pay that much attention to each aspect otherwise.
Yep. Great point. And maybe just to clarify my own comments, I'm still suggesting that if you were to bifurcate into to addressing your associate roles and your analyst roles, that within each of those sections, you might have one or two overarching bullets that speak to the totality of your role, but then you would still have the key projects, the selected project. You would still have, I mean, you probably have to separate these out based on when they occurred, but you would still have the financial services engagement. You would still have the industrial engagement. You still have the private equity engagement. I agree with what you just said. I think that's a great observation that it's eye-catching. They can see and immediately interpret. People talk about the blink on a resume. I think Malcolm Gladwell had a book, Blink. Like, what's the first glance? What do I interpret as a reader of your resume based on that? And then people can dive in more specifically. So I still definitely recommend, and I do like how you have those discrete projects penciled out there. I would just personally, but I think this would be a consensus view. I would have an associate bucket, and then I would have an associate section, for lack of a better term, and then an analyst section. And I would have the key accomplishments embedded within those sections. I think that they, like, almost in a sense, everything you're sharing in those sections is a key accomplishment. I almost feel like key accomplishments is a misnomer where it is now. Like, what you did on the private equity job that's a key accomplishment. What you did on the industrials jobs, those were key accomplishments. I don't know that the separation right now is intuitive, and for all those reasons described, I think that you are not taking optimal advantage of the visual representation of your upward trajectory and your promotions. MBA programs are looking at that. How is this person promoted? How is their impact accelerated? Your recommenders can talk about that, sure, and they'll see it in your applications, but on a visual, on a resume like this, I think that's the way personally that I would do it. Now, consider too, just for argument's sake and conversation's sake, I think you wouldn't want, and if anyone finds themselves in this situation where I've had like 4 roles, figuring out how to break those apart and structure them is very valuable. I think, Chishta, if you said to yourself, gee, let's say you sent a draft where you had junior analyst and then a few bullets about that, and senior analyst and a few bullets about that, and then junior associate, a few bullets about that, senior associate, a few bullets about that, then we would have a different kind of the reverse conversation. We would say, is there a way to potentially merge these? What really is the difference between when you were a junior analyst and senior analyst? If it's sort of gray and was more maybe a title change, we might end up on this same kind of 2-bucket approach that I've been describing. And that's kind of person specific and case specific.
Got it. Yeah, that makes sense.
Your other question was about impact. Great question, because I think, like you said, a lot of this rolls back to what impact can I show? How can I quantify that where I can quantify it? I think for a lot of people, think about, I talk often about like the what, how impact formula for resume bullets. What did you do? How did you do it? And what was the impact? Other people, and very similarly, might say, even think about situation action result or situation task action result, even within like a 2-line bullet. Now, that's a lot to get in there. And that's a construct you might use in essays or in interview answers where you have a lot more space than just 2 lines. But deconstructing in that manner or thinking about things in that manner can help if you kind of review every single resume bullet that you have through that lens and try to discipline yourself around making sure that those elements are present. It can drive you toward making sure that the impact is present. Now, what might impact be? One thing we all could do on our resumes is think about a before and an after. What changed? If you're trying to quantify it, which I would encourage everywhere you can or anywhere you can, try to quantify your impact. What was did revenue change for the client, dollars and percents? By the way, too, I would watch out with dollars and percents. If you're putting dollar changes and we don't know what the pre-existing state was, well, then we don't have context for what. So dollars and percents can be, but it's again, that is a little bit case by case as well. But quantification of things: did revenue change? Did did number of clients change? By what amounts did things increase? Was time saved? Is there greater efficiency? There's a whole litany, I think, of potential quantifications. If in consulting things were recommended, but then didn't actually happen yet, so you don't know the end result, you could think about what it enabled, or like what the recommendations would have represented, or if adopted would represent X change in revenue, profit, number of clients, outreach, engagement, whatever the metrics are. If absent all of that, you are still struggling for it. Sometimes revenue sizes or deal sizes for your company, if you're allowed to share them, can be valuable. I know you've got like revenue. You have size of company on here. That's a nice signal to kind of represent that as well. Absent quantified impact, think about qualitative expressions of impact. Can they do something now that they couldn't do before, thanks to all of this? What is the change? If you can't express it in numbers terms, still try to express the impact, in this case, qualitatively. I know this is all easier said than done, and it does become a matter of really wrestling, like bullet by bullet type work. A lot of times too, I'll just say as an aside, it can be daunting to try to attack an entire resume at once. I often encourage people to go like section by section, go deep on a given section or a given job or a given handful of bullets, try to get those right, and then begin to migrate toward the next. Because it is a difficult task. And Chishta, you asked about more precision too. That's a little, maybe a little bit tough to articulate. I think that is something that is a matter, again, of like going bullet by bullet, line by line, in order to make sure that you're expressing things in the clearest, but also most concise kind of manner, most precise and concise. So it's kind of this weird conundrum where I want somebody who doesn't know exactly what I do to be able to intuitively understand it on the page without writing them a novel or a book, like probably maximum 2 lines, I would say, just for anyone, a good rule of thumb. Rare cases, maybe there's cause or reason for a 3-line bullet, but basically in 1 or 2 line bullets, how do I capture all that? Again, I think it's a process. It's often a process, by the way, where it's okay to go, as you go through the process, it's okay to go long in order to go short. It's a little bit of a cliche that I use, but what does it mean? It means let's try to develop the content of the bullet to make sure that we have all of the component parts that we want, the what, the how, the impact, or the situation, the action, the result. Maybe my draft bullet is 2.5 lines, but once I really go into it and wrestle with it, I could get that down to 2 even lines. And it's that constant iteration and reduction of extraneous words. Do I really need that phrase? Do I really need that word that can help you boil down to the precision that you seek? So it's a little tough to kind of articulate it. It's almost like you do it when you do it. And look, if you have friends, colleagues, consultants, whoever it might be, that have a lot of experience with that, or are like the wordsmiths that or whatever in your life. Some people that's under their own skill set. Other people they say, hey, I gotta go ask my sibling or whatever. Ask people for that input. I mean, it's your resume. You're the one doing the resume, but they can offer advice. Is it clear? That's a good third party as well. I'm somebody who doesn't know exactly what you do, and is it clear to me what you do? Gee, maybe you could say it in a little bit of a different way. So let me pause there. Any other thoughts or questions regarding this?
No, I think that answered most of my questions. Thank you. Okay,
great. Let me just offer a couple of quick things, and then we'll move along to Daniel next. Chishta, just a couple other quick observations here, and for everyone's benefit, I believe you have a size 9 Calibri font on here. Calibri, totally fine among the kind of traditional and accepted font types these days, but 9 is a pretty small, I would say too small font size. A lot of schools, I'd encourage everyone to always read the instructions specific to each school. You don't want to be reinventing your resume or your CV with every school, but a lot of schools will express a minimum of 10. And I personally even think that 10 is a little low. It depends a little bit on the font type. You almost have to kind of look at it and say, well, that font type really reads really small as 10, and that one reads a little bigger as 10. But I think 10 is a baseline. I would treat that as a minimum. Don't go below. I would not go below 10. Really, I would try for 10 and a half or 11 personally. And again, you'd be surprised. It's like you have a draft, you like your draft, you already got it onto one page. Most schools out there, by the way, will want one-page resumes. Some will allow a little bit longer in their instructions, but note to everyone, there are going to be schools, probably most schools want a one-page resume. So even if there are a couple out there that say it can go up to 2 pages, do you really want, you're going to be hitting 5 schools in like 3 weeks of deadlines? Do you really want to be reinventing your resume for each school? Probably not. I think a one-page resume, as everyone on this call has, is a good rule of thumb. What I was going to say is you'd be surprised to think you have everything on one page. Oh my goodness, if I raise the font to 11, it's going to go throw everything out of whack. It will for like a minute or a few minutes when you first do it. And then you can go in and it actually becomes a good reason to try to pursue that precision that we've been talking about. So I think minimum of 10, really probably I prefer more 10 and a half or even 11. Just a quick note there. Locations, I'm not sure if that was just removed for purposes of this conversation, but I would put locations, Chishta, on, associated with your jobs and where these things occurred. I don't think that's on there right now. And maybe again, this was just an interim draft for this conversation. So I would get locations on there. Think about too, the locations of the clients. That could be interesting as well. If there is anything interesting about that, if they were in different parts of the region, different parts of the world, if it's a multinational company, even if most of the work you were doing was like, within India, like, look for opportunities to open up that international element. So think about that as well. Sometimes people put not only the type of company and maybe the size of the company, but also where that company is headquartered, or within their bullets might express where things were based. For Bain, I would probably put, see how you have for We Are Holidays, a big, bold date range? I would probably put some sort of date range that captures the totality of your Bain, or McKinsey or BCG experience, of your MBB experience. I would put the totality, like a full range of date, and then you could have the sub dates for each of the bullets within. And just one last thought on verbs. If it's a present job, a current job, like you've got worked there, but if you still work there, I would use the present tense of the verb. And maybe there's probably a stronger verb than just work with. I don't know if it's partner with, collaborate with, advise. There's probably a stronger word to work, but from a tense perspective, for present tense, and we're going to see this with some other folks as well, let's use the present tense. And by present tense, just for everyone's edification as well, because you've got leading and working, and I know this varies a little bit, perhaps varies country to country, culture to culture. I would use not leading or working as the present tense, which is the gerund of the verb. I would say lead, work, partner, not leading, working, partnering. That at least through the lens of most of the MBA programs that you apply to would be the common way to do it. So that's just a couple of other observations, and we can keep on moving forward and make sure we go through things with the same detail for everyone else. So thank you, Chishta. We'll move ahead to Daniel. Daniel, any specific questions or what was on your mind as you produced your resume?
Yeah, I guess I thought of some things as you guys talked over Chishta's. But yeah, as far as bucketing, not really much creativity on my part. Just went in reverse chronological resume. Obviously come from the military, is making sure I kind of translate that military speak to this, I guess, civilian speak, not using jargon. So I did make an effort to eliminate that, but again, I don't know if there's really anything in there that may be confusing or just still jargon. Let's see what else. And then as far as like the amount of bullets or the number of bullets per each responsibility, I don't know if there's like a general guideline for how many you want. I know my most recent one, I have quite a few. I don't know if I should maybe try to eliminate that, what your feedback is on that. And yeah, those are the kind of the big things that I was thinking about.
Okay, great. Appreciate all that. So let's work through or talk through some of those. Just a quick observation, by the way, and there are different schools of thought on this. My personal preference, I think this would be probably a consensus or majority preference as well, would be that from a sectioning standpoint, because you're many years removed from your college days, this is true for basically anyone who has some work experience applying to an MBA program or a grad program. I would put your professional experience at the top. It is the most recent. I would put your education below that. There are admittedly different schools of thought on this, but I just think from a logical and current and chronological standpoint, let's pretend you didn't even do HBX Core E. Let's say you just had West Point up there. That was 2012. You have 8 years of like real deal, major international leadership, military experience. That's the juice. I mean, Service Academy is obviously very, very, very impressive as well. But from a chronology standpoint, that is where I think many others would recommend. Now, once you're in the MBA program, education goes back on top because that's the most recent. You're a MBA candidate at such and such an MBA program. Then education goes back on top, and it's this kind of dance between. Is an AdCom going to like ding you because education is on top? No, or probably not, or I don't know. Maybe some AdCom person out there has like a weird pet peeve about it, but no, people aren't going to ding you for that. By the way, there's like MIT Sloan I'm thinking of. They actually articulate in their resume instructions what order they want things in, and they do want education on top, and they actually want your name redacted from the top. So, maybe that's a counter argument to what I'm saying here, but just a little brief observation. You can, straw poll that, but that's my view, and I would say even a strong view about it. I don't see why. Hey, I was in college 2008 to 2012. That is preceding the 8 years of real deal stuff that I've done since. They'll see the military, So anyway, more than we needed on that, but just a thought. I do like, by the way, that you mentioned reverse chronological order, and I think that's kind of a natural thing. That's great. Great instincts, I think, for everybody out there listening. Reverse chronological order, meaning put the most recent within like a professional experience section, put the most recent thing first, as Daniel's done here, and then kind of work backward from there. So the most recent is at the top, the least recent is toward the bottom, and somebody can, and this is within each section, so that somebody reading it can follow your trajectory. You talked about jargon. I think that's something that every military applicant, many military applicants wrestle with. It's something that many technical field applicants wrestle with as well, folks coming from engineering, perhaps. I think you have done a good job of addressing that. It does not feel overwhelmingly jargonistic, or even really jargonistic to me, if jargonistic is even a word, but jargony. So I think you've done a nice job with that. I think there are still, and this is probably in the category of just constant bullet wrestling. Are there spots where potentially, if you or we or you with someone or whatever really continue to wrestle with these, would there be opportunities not just to like the jargon I think you've gotten away from, but would there be, so if it's removal or avoidance of jargon, on one hand. Then once I've got a bullet in place, how do I enhance that so that I am unpacking the optimal value of my bullets so that each of the bullets perhaps has a unique ethos or unique angle to it? What am I trying to express with each of those? For Chishta, just to draw a parallel, we talked about how when you're calling out certain of those client projects or client engagements, why am I choosing each of the ones that I'm choosing? Maybe one is more analytical, maybe one is more innovative, maybe one is more international, maybe one is more leadership oriented, maybe one is more collaborative. I think same logic here. Granted, you're not going to have that kind of like select project thing, just talking bullet to bullet. What's the reason that each bullet exists? What is the ethos of that bullet? What skill or accomplishment or type of thing does it show about me? I think that, so not just the avoidance of jargon, but then the optimization of the value of each. Again, it comes down to kind of wrestling on a bullet by bullet basis, but I would just maybe keep that in mind. What's the point of each? What is it showing? Is it an operational skill? Is it personnel management? Is it mentorship? And that sort of thing. And that might segue into number of bullets too, but let me pause there for follow-up questions or thoughts or clarifications.
Okay.
Any
and obviously we talked number of bullets. Oh, sorry. Yeah. So you talked number of bullets. And when you're talking to Chishta, you talked about how like that first impression, that first glance, and at least when I look at mine, I just kind of like see like a sea of words. So I don't know if there's anything I could do to kind of not, I guess, have the reader kind of get lost in it, or what I can do to maybe like highlight something in particular.
Yep. Great. So another great question. I think that just from an overall macro structural standpoint, the 4 buckets for you seem right to me. I don't necessarily know that, again, from a structural standpoint, we'll talk specific bullets in a second. I think that you've got probably the right buckets, again, without knowing you beforehand or knowing the intricate details of these. It seems correct. If I were looking at this resume, say, okay, these are the 4 main gigs that you've had. And I can see kind of your progression within that. I think, again, for military applicants, it is common. I've worked with military applicants who had, I even pulled a couple of the resumes up just for my own kind of comparative reference here, 6 or 7 different distinct roles. And we had to figure out how to bucket those. But I think for you, the 4 feels right at a macro standpoint. One thing I'd think about, too, this is more micro, but as we think about progression, if your title advanced, 2nd lieutenant, 1st lieutenant, captain, whatever, is there a way to show that? Is it even just that word and then a comma and then the functional title after it? Is it, I'm looking at just at this is a completely different resume, but just a military resume as well. A West Pointer as well in this case. 2nd lieutenant, comma, officer trainee. 1st lieutenant, comma, battalion battle captain and plans officer. 1st lieutenant, comma, Arctic striker rifle platoon leader. And then kind of onward from there. Is there a way? And they can then see not just the functional titles, but if the ranks kind of play to your favor, or if that upward progression plays, there's probably a way to visually structure that in. Sometimes you got to get a little creative with abbreviations or with how things are layered. More to your specific question about number of bullets, I do think I did have the initial reaction, which you shared as well. I think that's a good observation is, man, maybe it does feel like a little bit of a blob of text. How can we work on that? I think that comes down to number of bullets. I think there are many elements to this. Probably number of bullets. I think there's probably too many here. The eyes kind of glaze over as somebody reads it. Ethos, that capturing the unique ethos of bullets, how to do that. And maybe even font size a little bit too. So we can work through those. First thing with font size, we mentioned it a moment ago. I believe you had size 10 font on here. If you did, and it does it really jams things together and condenses things. If you ticked that up to 10.5 or even 11, It's going to be more readable, and it's going to force you to be more disciplined about number of bullets and what you're capturing in each spot. I think one way to potentially reduce number of bullets here is I observed a lot of like probably more than necessary number of bullets related to rankings, ratings, being chosen. I was rated this, I was rated that, I received this ranking, I received this rating. Some of that is nice. I think it is nice to have spots where you are hand selected for leadership roles and things like that. But if there are rankings and ratings and those sorts of things, could those be just one bullet per section? Do you need, like maybe even a last bullet? If you were looking for some sort of symmetry even between sections, could the final bullet of each section as a one-liner be these formal ratings or formal rankings or what have you quantified there? Could those live as the fourth? I think right now those might take up in certain spots maybe a little bit too much space. It could be an opportunity to synthesize, create symmetry that somebody can then follow along a little more easily rather than having them scattered. And it could open up some more space. So that's maybe a more micro piece. I think that you could also, going back to the ethos of each bullet, what's its reason for existence? Do they all need to be here? If one of the things you're trying to capture is like, let's say, operational expertise. I had like operations were a big part of this job, or personnel management, or project leadership. If you right now have 2 bullets that maybe speak to a similar ethos within a similar job, could those potentially be condensed? This is where the hard work of bullet editing comes into play. But could those be condensed into a single 2-line bullet that captures that same ethos? And then you've got another 2-line bullet that captures a distinct ethos there. When you have this many, something like an average of 3 to 4 per category feels right to me. But you might have a little more than that for the most recent jobs. A little different maybe for you because, but yeah, typically maybe you'd swing a little more toward more bullets for the more recent jobs, perhaps fewer for the earlier ones. But if, I say maybe a little different for you because if that first job, the oldest job, had you in Afghanistan, you might not want to cut that short either. So that rule of thumb might not apply perfectly to you. You might find yourself in a situation where there's maybe more of an even balance between them. And if I were trying to be, mathematical about it, I guess I would maybe think about 4 bullet. You don't have to have the same number per category, but just as like a disciplining exercise, is it 4 bullets? Let me target 4 bullets per category. And the last one of those is that 1-liner about ratings. And then I've got 3 2-liners or something to that effect with the rest of it. And then as you do that, you might say to yourself, gee, having 3 of those 2-liners for this job is a little weaker. I don't need 3 there. I could just do 2 there, but I want to move, I'm going to take like one of these other jobs. I really want to use that space. But that could be a disciplining exercise. Not to ramble on too much here. 2 other quick thoughts though. This is for everyone as well. Look out for, some people call them widow words or hanging chads to evoke memories of the 2000 US election. What do those mean? That means situations where you bleed onto an extra line by like 2 words. I think I see one there where you've got like lieutenant colonel, and it's you're onto the next line by 2 words. We usually think about that as an inefficient use of space, a widow word or widow words in this case. How can I cut those? I'm just going on to the next line by like 1 or 2 words. There's going to be a way to edit that bullet so that it can live on 1 line and take more optimal advantage of space. And I had one other thought too, just something to play with. I've talked a lot about what's the ethos of each bullet. What's my purpose? Why am I capturing it? Why is it there? I have in certain situations with a variety of applicant clients, as well as in a few cases, particularly in the military, sometimes people even like to brand their bullets. It can be experimental, but it would be like at the beginning of each bullet, let's say the ethos of the bullet, you want it to be operations, and the ethos of the next bullet, you want to be mentorship, and the ethos of the next bullet, you want to be personnel management. You'd actually put those words in italics at the start of the bullet so that in a resume where you otherwise risk having a big sea or big ocean of bullets, you actually now are training the eyes of the reader to get the main point or main gist of it right from the get-go. So sometimes that's something you experiment with along the way, and you're like, I like it, I don't like it. It's not for everybody, but it's an option or a consideration. And I have seen it be effective in certain military cases, particularly because of for reasons described. So other thoughts or questions?
Mm-hmm. No other burning thoughts or questions right now. I think we covered a lot.
Okay, great. Last thought, and then we'll move forward is, just try to, if there is ever business relevance, this particularly again for people coming from military or coming from really technical jobs, if there ever is opportunity for like some business relevance, I think you've done a pretty good job, I think, of that with certain spots so far, talking about, the in that second job, talking about analysis of purchases and spending and budget. Great instinct there. Great instinct there, because look, you're now taking something where on its face, a job on its face might not seem so business relevant. I'm looking for opportunities. It doesn't have to just be analytically business relevant, by the way. There are many other business relevant things. We've mentioned operations a few times or what have you. But yeah, look for those opportunities: supply chain, logistics, planning, organization, consensus building. Another thing to throw out there too, just as we think through this freely, for something like that quantitative analysis, maybe it could be just unto itself. But if after you performed that quantitative analysis, you presented your findings to your superiors and convinced them or persuaded them or influenced them to increase it by 15% because you made some business case that you quantified somehow, that could be a cool conjunct or something to kind of add on to that to expand the value of it. That's just one example, but just some fodder for thought in terms of unpacking the value of one's bullet points.
Okay.
All right. So good deal. And apologies if it's ever like kind of long-winded or a lot to digest, but I guess, I don't know, you live and breathe, like living and breathing resume bullets. It becomes like a it's a difficult exercising, but also at times a fascinating one in terms of how do I use this finite space? How do I marry the design and the feel with the actual content? But we'll keep it going, and we're gonna run a little long here, just looking at the clock to make sure we give everyone fair time. But let's move along to Kartik, and we can talk through his resume. Kartik, any specific questions or things come to mind for you? Concerns, things you're wrestling with?
Yeah, so I've actually given my resume a fair bit of thought, but like just going over the resumes we've discussed so far, I'm wondering if I've chopped off too much and I've got just the very bare minimum. So just wanted to get a broad sense check on if I put too little. And the other thing that I'm wondering about is, so some of my extracurriculars, I believe, are strong because I've held a few offices there. And I'm wondering what the best way to bring those out is as well.
Got it. Great questions. So I think that you probably, the resume does feel thin on text. For me, I think we actually, for everyone kind of following along, we have maybe two different sides of the spectrum here, with having seen Daniel's resume beforehand, which I think, if I ran a word count on it, was between 650 and 700 words of content on the resume. And Kartik, yours was, I think, in the 300, let's just double check it, about 300 words. The balance probably lies somewhere in between those levels. It does feel maybe you did cut too much I think there probably are opportunities to kind of re-up a little bit, or look for not like overwhelmingly so, but I think there probably would be opportunities to look for spots to add or create value in certain areas. I think just one thing I don't think we've touched on just yet. I do like how you have a description of the company. Renew Power, Unlimited Power, is a $3 billion clean energy firm from India. So that's a good instinct there, especially when it's perhaps something that might not on its face be totally understood or known to the admissions committee. If somebody works at a McKinsey, Bain, or BCG, do you really need that one-line strip to describe what the company does? Probably not. You could use that space differently. But for individuals who work at a less known firm, I do like that idea. I personally typically drive more toward a one-liner for that than a two-liner. I think, again, you'll be surprised. And I see here too, you have both information about the firm as well as then like who you report to and what you're responsible for. My instinct there, and there's no like hard written rules on this, but my instinct or preference there, I like to see when you're putting that one line description of the company, I would put it under the company name, however you want to format it. Oftentimes it's italicized. One liner, what is the company? Sometimes people put in parentheses toward the end of it, the revenue, the size, sometimes even number of employees. And then when you get into things like who you report to or what you do, those can come in your bullets. So it would, in your case, you'd be kind of separating company description and then leaving the what you do and who you report to and what you're responsible for and who you interact with, and then all of your accomplishments and impact within that for the bullets. Now, that's a very micro kind of comment, but I think hopefully helpful for you and perhaps others out there thinking about, hey, if my company is not immediately known, even if it's known in your home country perhaps or your home environment, if it's not going to be immediately known or understood what I do or what this company does, is there a one-line italicized company description that could go below? And if you italicize that, you probably don't want to italicize your title as well. You could get into all the formatting dynamics. So that's just a thought or observation there. You asked, we could talk more about some of these professional bullets, but you did ask about extracurriculars, and it sounds like you've got some strong extracurriculars, some leadership positions, and so forth. This is kind of perhaps a sectioning conversation. You will typically see in MBA resumes either 3 sections, akin to what you have on the screen right now, or 4 sections. If it's 4 sections, I would think about experience or professional experience as the first section. Something titled like either involvement or community or leadership or extracurriculars. Sometimes people even might have entrepreneurial things in there if they for some reason don't belong in like the proper professional section. As a second section, then education, then perhaps an other or an additional or a skills and interests or a hobbies kind of whatever languages I speak kind of interest section rather at the bottom. People have different schools of thoughts on this as well, but I would say, Kartik, if you do have extracurriculars that you feel strongly about, are they from college only, or are they also exist post-college?
Started in college, but have bled into my existing.
I would be inclined toward giving those more coverage on the resume. Again, structurally, that could occur within confines of the sections you have now and go into like the other section. I personally we'd have to kind of see it and to feel it out. I'd probably put it in that community or involvement or leadership section and have experience or professional experience, then community or involvement or leadership, however you want to title it, kind of depends on what ends up in there. And then actually give those an entry. It doesn't need to be as big of an entry as what you have for your professional jobs, but it could be like the name of the org and your title, location, dates on one line, and then a bullet or two about them. And here you modulate that based on the value and what you want to express and what you want to come across. And I think that could create an opportunity for you to present, unlock, and take optimal advantage of the value that exists with those, and kind of diversify the blink on your resume. It's not just these jobs. It's also, whoa, look at this leadership. And I think that could be an opportunity for you. You don't want you don't want to like have like 12 things listed in there. You should kind of really key in on the main couple, or and maybe have a little more depth with those. But that again gets modulated depending on what you're involved in and the depth of each. But let me pause there for questions, thoughts, comments, clarifications.
No, I hear you. I get your point.
All right. Related comment too, just for everybody, for you and for everybody. When we think about extracurriculars, I would encourage you to think about almost think about a hierarchy of things you're involved in. And within that hierarchy, you might at the very top end have things you have been very deeply involved in, and they've been key leadership or experiences. Maybe they were through work, maybe they were outside of work. On the low end of that spectrum, you might have things that you're just nominally involved in. You're just a member, pretty passive, pretty sporadic, whatever the case may be. As we think about this spectrum, you can, both for your resume as well as for your applications overall, think about what is the value of each of these, where in the spectrum do they lie, and therefore, where could they or should they show up in my application? For something that is like you're so involved in, and it's been so key to who you are, and is so expressive of who you are as a person or a leader or your values or your skills, that on the high end could even be an essay. If you had an essay question that asked you about a key experience, and that whole essay asked about that key experience, I'm thinking about maybe a Kellogg #1 for the people out there applying to Kellogg, or other example-centric tuck #3 or whatever. The ones that are really strong could be the extracurriculars, the things you're involved in that are really strong, provided they're not like way in the past, could become and be strong enough to be centerpieces of an essay. The ones that are maybe less strong, or where situations where you have to synthesize a little bit, they could be parts of an essay or references of an essay, or one of 2 or 3 things you talk about in an essay. Other things are going to have more space on your resume. Other things are going to have less space. If it's something you're nominally involved in that's still worth mentioning, it might be 1 line on your resume, perhaps like at the bottom of your, right now, you mentioned a paper that you wrote. Like if that felt like, okay, it's cool to mention, but it doesn't need a ton of space, maybe it warrants 1 line. So this is the spectrum. Think about the spectrum of those activities, what they reveal about you, what the value would be. And that can inform both on your resume and across your application how much attention they get. So I think that's something else to think about. Kartik, other observations, you've got, good amount of white space on here. White space is good. You're not overwhelming the reader with text, but we talked about, I think maybe you could build things out a little bit more. Your line spacing in certain parts I think in certain parts it's 1.1, which is actually not that high, but in certain parts, especially those bullets under education, it almost looks like it's more. It almost looks, at least visually, experientially to me, it almost feels like 1.5 spacing or something. There's like pretty big amount of space there, probably too much space to the point that I don't think you'd like run out of real estate on your resume when you go to make these updates or enhancements. So those are some thoughts there. In the consulting position, how long were you there? I know you've got years on here, but not months. How long were you there in total? Was it a matter of months? Was it over a year?
It was about 1.5 years, actually.
Okay. That might be so 2 things on that. I think that visually, when we looking at this only see 2017 to 2018, of course, in your application, they're going to see the exact dates that you were there. So it's not like it's going to be hidden. But from a visual and interpretive standpoint, just putting those years, 2017 to 2018, doesn't do full justice to the length of time you were actually there. Like you could look at that and say, gee, was he there from like September of 2017 to March of 2018? It was only 6 months. When in fact, for you, it started earlier in 2017, it ended later in 2018. You've got a full year and a half. I would probably use months on here, and think about there too. I'm not sure how engagement oriented your job was, but you could play around. I know as you were a business analyst.
I definitely had more projects which I've left out on purpose. Which I can include here.
Sure. Yeah. I think as you kind of navigate between where's my value, what do I want to capture, what's the point of including each bullet or each project or each reference, you might, in a consulting job, even if it was a business analyst job, if there were engagements, projects, you could consider a Chista style project orientation if it, if relevant, if space allows. I suppose you could also just have each of those as distinct bullets, and you kind of play with that. Other thoughts or questions or specific questions?
I'm good. Do the verbs look okay? Is that something? Is there a red flag apart from these?
No, I think it would take a little bit more of a granular analysis. Let me just see here. I do like how, and this is for everyone's edification as well, I do like how you've varied your action verbs at the beginning of each line. I do like that. You've got unlocked, facilitated, conceptualized and executed, improved, mentored. So there's variance not only within each part, but also between the parts. So that's something good for people to remind everyone out there. Aim to start your bullets with action verbs, and look for opportunities not to kind of repeat the same. You're looking to get it. There's kind of a stylistic variance that's beneficial here, as well as also a content variance that can be helpful. So that when the reader goes through these, they see and feel different things. It's kind of a very micro, the same way each bullet has an ethos. Well, the initial creation of that ethos often comes by way of the action verb. Is it something this person managed or recommended or innovated or changed or rethought or conceptualized or facilitated or unlocked? In Kartik's example here, I like how you've got the international, you're kind of unpacking the value of the international elements of what you do. I wonder if you could go in certain spots, maybe a little more like when you say managing in the middle bullet, the facilitated 12 million equity partnership with Norwegian energy company. I mean, if we were really trying, you'd have to get really micro about this in terms of managing length and managing, does it still fit? Could there be an opportunity to unpack a little further, like who were those stakeholders? Maybe there's a cross-functional element in there that is maybe a little bit of value being left on the table. It's cool. What this is cool and interesting. The fact that it's a Norwegian energy company, a huge one at that, is really cool. If there's a little bit of a cross-functional leadership you could kind of add to that as well. You'd have to manage the space and see if it fits, but I think you've got a great start here. By the way, too, just for everyone's, we were talking with Chista earlier about, hey, how do I convey impact? Sometimes that stuff has already occurred. Other times it hasn't occurred yet. And let's look at the bullet that starts with the word conceptualized for Kartik here, and look at later in the first line where he talks about projected revenue impact of $1.7 million per year. That's a good example of that. It hasn't happened yet, but he's still able to express or quantify to the reader what that impact will be. So that is great. One other kind of ongoing thought and consideration for everyone to keep in mind too, when the time comes to interview, this is away from resumes. When the time comes to interview, many of the specific examples or the specific references that you're making via like a 2-line bullet here, those could become responses to behavioral questions in interviews. What's a behavioral question? That's a question where the interviewer asks you, tell me about a time you led a cross-cultural team. Tell me about a time you worked with people who were unlike you. Tell me about a time you led a team. Tell me about a time you overcame a challenge. Tell me about any of these kind of tell me about a time, share an example of. Those are behavioral questions. And as I look through these bullets, I say to myself, oh, interesting, Kartik, if you got a question about, tell me about a time you led a cross-functional team. Tell me about a time you led an international project. Tell me about a time you, Daniel, maybe tell me about a time you persuaded, you persuaded leadership to change something. I don't know if it was just the example where you convinced them to boost the budget. Maybe there's probably something for you that's even more kind of robust than that from an innovation or process change standpoint. But everyone can think about, what is my mental bench of examples? It's kind of parallels to this ethos thing. What's the ethos of each of my bullets? Those eventually can kind of become my mental bench of examples for my interview later on. I've got a failure story. I've got an overcome a challenge story. I've got a led a team story. I've got an international story. I've got a cross-functional story. I've got an analytical story. You build out that bench in your head and you could go there during interviews. So Kartik, any last questions? Otherwise we could move on to Borjan and close this out.
I'm good. Thanks, Greg.
All right. Thank you. Borjan, any specific questions or concerns or things that you've been having trouble with or would like to ask about to start our resume conversation?
Well, I guess I have some of the questions that were previously asked by the guys. So one of these is like how to convey impact, and if I was able to do so, any red flags in the resume, and progression of my career, is it clear from the resume how I advanced up the career ladder? Because I started in cost controls and I moved to analytics and I moved to CRM, and maybe for some people who are not know the insights, maybe could seem confusing. So I was worrying about it.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Appreciate those questions. So let's think through a couple of things here. Just really quick observations for your benefit and perhaps for others as well. I talked a moment ago with Kartik about like the one line I potentially italicized description of company. What you have here is a pretty good example of that for folks following along. Under the words credit bank, Borjan has the fact that it's an unsecured personal loans provider with $1 billion plus revenue and around 6,000 employees. Now, even though I don't know what that bank is, I have an idea of what they do and to whom they provide it and who their customers are and what the size is and things like that. Perhaps there might be an opportunity if we played around with that or learned more about this bank. Maybe there'd be an opportunity to add a few more words to flesh out the line. We'd have to see, are those words valuable? Are they adding anything? If they serve, Borjan, are the loans extended only to people in Kazakhstan, or is it multiple countries for the clients?
Oh, it's only for the locals.
Got
only
it.
For locals.
Got it. Okay, so I'm just thinking out loud about it. Could there be, with those extra words potentially, if there was like an international market, or if you served people in different industries or countries or whatever, could you flesh that out? But good example, good clarity there. Maybe an opportunity if we were to wrestle with that, maybe an opportunity for a few more lines. Little micro stuff too. I think you've got certain spots where you have the months and certain spots where you don't. You've got years only in certain spots. You've got a month and year in others. I would just be consistent with that. Whichever approach you prefer. I personally lean toward including the months. Typically MBA and I happen to prefer personally 3-letter abbreviations for them. We all have our own little idiosyncrasies with that. I just think that it is clear, as you have November, like November is NOV, December is DEC. Full months can take up a lot of visual space, I think needlessly so. But for your purposes, I would maybe just render that consistent. You've got, like, for the head of analytics team, you've got 2014 to November of 2019. Well, when in 2014 did that start? By the way, note to everyone, make sure that the months are consistent between your resume and then what you put into the online application where you insert your jobs. For that matter, make sure it's consistent with your LinkedIn profile as well. Also very micro, and no one's going to kill you for this, but or ding you for this. I think there's probably a consensus preference for no period at the end of your bullets. We could debate the rationale for that or where it comes from. I think from a design perspective, it just keeps it makes things feel less like staccato, and less like it just keeps things flowing. There's some sort of kind of like, I don't know, almost subconscious to it. So really micro, you're not going to get dinged. No one's going to get dinged for having periods on their resume. But from a consensus perspective, and I think when you're in MBA programs as well and working with their career center, you're typically not going to have periods on there. So just a little micro thing. You asked some bigger picture questions though, and probably more important questions as well. Is the progression clear and evident? I think that it is. I would say for the most part, it is. Maybe there are some minor adjustments that could be considered in order to make it a little clearer. I got a question for you. When you were a cost controller and then a senior cost controller, were those two different roles that there was a promotion in there?
Yep.
Okay. Great. Well, let me say, I do like that you have them merged together. From a bucketing standpoint, we think back to what we were talking about with Chishta and Daniel. I think it is probably efficient and the right thing to do for you to deliver the bullets for those two roles under the same, kind of in the same chunk or in the same segment. The one thing I think you maybe could do is make that, I had to kind of work to tell that there was a promotion there, and it still was a little bit of a question. If you look back at Chishta's resume, she had like the title and the dates for each title within that. That could be something that you overlay here. In other words, putting, yes, you might have been in these controller positions from 2011 to 2014, but what were is there a way to show more clearly visually that you were a cost controller in the beginning with the dates that apply to that, and then a senior controller thereafter? I think that's something else that could be considered. You were head of the analytics team for a good amount of time. Was there any sub promotions or titling change or anything within that, or were you just the head of the analytics team the whole time?
No promotion.
Got it. Okay, then that's fine. I mean, look, you were the head of the team, so maybe there's no nowhere else to go within it, and that's a very impressive and great thing. The only reason I asked it is because as we were talking about with Daniel, I think that particular part of your resume, it feels like the text gets a little bit kind of drawn out and long. We're talking about the head of analytics job, which is very, very impressive. I think there's a ton of value in there. There might be opportunities to it could be a synthesis thing. It could be a cutting the weakest bullets thing. It could even be, and we talked about, these are experimental. They're not for everybody. Sometimes you try them out, see how you like them, see how they fit. Again, what is the ethos of each bullet? What's it there for? And if you find that the bullets or the things you did within that job role, within that particular role, roll up to 3 main categories. And when you're the head of the analytics team, there are going to be analytical initiatives. Looks like you've got here some like HR stuff and interviewing, hiring, mentorship. Could those be folded into one? Could you use that one word tag within? Maybe if you do it here, you're not doing it in other spots. Maybe you don't want to do that. Could you even put, I've seen this done, and again, it's all that experimental. It's all what makes it the cleanest and most immediately interpreted thing for each person. If you, again, found that these bullets all lived within 3 different categories and you were struggling to synthesize and it felt like you had a big blob of text in this middle of your resume, could there be a way to put an italicized word, a few or a phrase, and then a couple of bullets that correspond to that type of responsibility? So let's say, for instance, in this job as head of analytics, you found in working through your bullets that your tasks, accomplishments, et cetera, here rolled into 3 main categories. And those 3 categories were one bucket was really like analytical and algorithmic and technical and quantitative and creative in that sense. And another category was more related to personnel management and team building and mentorship and HR kind of stuff. And there was another one that was related to, I don't know, client interactions or communications or something like that. You could put, so not a word at the front of each bullet, but a word or a few words above to kind of section it out into 3 chunks so that I, as the reader, instead of kind of my eyes glazing over a blob of text, now I have some sort of theme that you are communicating to me. Maybe, again, that first one more analytical. And then I've got 2 bullets there. And then the second one, more team leadership related. And then I've got a couple bullets there. And the third one, more client and communicative and interpersonal. And I've got a couple bullets there. By the way, I would probably reorder those even just as they came out of my mouth. I was thinking the leadership one should be first. You headed this team. You had a lot of personnel building and team building type responsibility. So that's a way to potentially solve for, gee, I got like a laundry list of bullets here. How can I organize these? How can I control the messaging in the mind of the reader so that they immediately pick up on these things? Psychologically, it's kind of similar to what we talked about. It's similar but different to what we talked about for Chishta with the specific projects. I'm training the eyes of the reader. I'm creating a little bit of white space to do a little bit of sectioning, to train the eyes of the reader toward the things or themes or projects that I want them to see in a kind of clustered and digestible format, rather than allowing their eyes to glaze over and have a hard time interpreting. So that could be a consideration there. Let me pause for thoughts, questions, comments, reactions.
Well, fully agree. I guess it's like too condensed.
I think certain spots, by the way, you might find you have those widow words or widow phrases or hanging chads. There's probably some cleanup opportunity with those. What else? In the bottom section, the additional information section, additional information in 2018 and 2016 and 2014. There might be a way, there probably is a way to revisit that bottom section, that additional information section. It feels like a little bit of a laundry list, I think, right now. You'd want to maybe wrestle with what's there. If certain of them, if you found that like 3 or 4 of them are awards, you might even be able to have, and this is a potential approach in the bottom of a resume, in an additional information or a skills and interest or a certification skills and interest section, additional section. Is there a way to cluster there as well? Sometimes people like to put the keyword or category on the left side of the page, perhaps in bold, say awards or something like that. In bold, then tab in, so you got a little bit of space, and then put some of the awards across, and probably, synthesize them as best you can. I mean, look for ones that are really valuable. Maybe you use a whole line, and then go to the second line with the others. If they're more nominal awards, you might just say what they are and put the year in. And then in an online app, elaborate further. Why did you win it? Who chose you? Out of how many people were you chosen? But long story short, I think that there is an opportunity here to clean up. So it has a little bit of a laundry list feeling right now. How can I synthesize, organize, cluster? Is it with that keyword on the left? For you, would it be awards, tab in, then you've got your awards. Maybe you need 2 lines if you've got a good amount of awards. Is it languages or international? And then tab in and elaborate on that. The language, the multiple languages you speak fluently, and other things you've done internationally. Is it certifications? Another one. And then you could get the PMP, the Lean Six Sigma Green Belt, and the CFA. You've got that kind of now, but because they're all just like listed together, it's hard to see. We're making the reader do too much work. And like, yeah, eventually they're going to see them in your app, but it's not the optimal way, I think, and the most imprintable way on the mind of the resume reader, the admissions person, to do that. Other last thoughts, I'd think about, maybe 2 last thoughts here. We talked about verbs and action verbs and things that start each year and tenses and stuff like that. Your very first bullet, if we go back up to at the top, your current role, head of clients, analytics, and portfolio management. Maybe, by the way, I get this is going to vary country to country and translation to translation. I think if this is going to like US or European MBA programs or something, I feel like the group is more typically called head of client analytics. Really micro, maybe it doesn't translate in exactly that manner, but just a quick little, very micro thought. The first bullet in there, though, it starts with responsible for. I think we can enhance that. Manage, lead, what's the verb? Responsible for, okay, it says what you're responsible for, but you're the head of the group, you lead, you manage. I think there's a stronger way to open that and still articulate what it is you do within. That second bullet we talked about a little bit before, that's the leading or the gerund form. I think we probably want to see lead there. And by the way, too, it just came out of my mouth. You wouldn't want lead for both of those. We wouldn't want lead, then lead. You got to think about what's my variance and what fits best, or should it even be synthesized into the same bullet? Should that become a 2-line? If that is the bullet that speaks to the totality of what you lead and how you've grown it or whatever, could that be a 2-liner and the whole thing starts with lead or manage? So yeah, and I think looking for other opportunities, we talked about some of those. You've got created and created a little further down. I think that could probably be improved. Last thought is, because you were in that head of analytics role for 4 or 5 years, I don't know if there's a way for it to come across on the resume. Probably the way that I talked about before with that clustering is maybe an optimal approach there, or one to consider. But for future reference in like an interview or something, if you were in a certain role for 5 years, I would just be thinking about and be prepared perhaps to articulate, how did my responsibilities change? How did I grow things? We don't want them to get this impression that for 5 years you were in this static kind of same thing. We want to make sure if you were the head of the team, what were you building? How was it growing? That could show up on your resume, by the way, as well. We want to feel that impact. How did it grow over those 5 years? But just think, have that in your mind for expression on the resume, potentially, as well as then expression. If it's in essays or recommendations or interviews down the line, what actually happened and grew and advanced and changed under your leadership in this case during that time. We don't want them to think that like you came in 2014, you held the same title, and nothing really, interesting got built or happened. So, but very impressive. I think the fact that you head of analytics team, head of client analytics and portfolio management, these are fantastic roles, and kudos to you for having secured and succeeded in those roles. 1.5 million active clients. This is not a business that has only 10 clients or 20 clients. So great job by you. Make sure you're unpacking the value of that leadership. Encourage your recommenders. to do the same. Share things about that and insights into that in your essays, because I think you've had a unique opportunity here to lead teams. By the way, too, if you're recommenders, if they picked you, if they were the one who hired you or picked you for those, why did they pick you? What did you do in the role? And we could go kind of on and on, but hopefully that helps. Any last thoughts or questions, Borjan?
No, actually, lots of good recommendations. I wrote them down, and thanks so much. Lots of work to do. I think it will be a great improvement.
All right. Well, I hope so. I know it's a lot to digest. This turns into a long call, so I apologize for that. But I hope that the information and level of detail and thoroughness and thoughts have you guys, as well as everyone else, dialed in, thinking about ways that can potentially improve. Let's spend maybe the last 5 minutes here. We'll put it to a clean kind of hour and a half. We could spend the last 5 minutes with questions from the crowd. How far back from brand or core? How far back should we go with our jobs? College, high school, should we include smaller jobs like TA or greater positions? Great question. MBA programs are most concerned with your full-time post-college jobs. In an online application where you're listing your jobs, they have drop downs and different things, or you got to kind of upload each job. They're usually going to ask you only to list those jobs that were full-time post-college jobs in that section. So that should be the main focus here on a resume. In a professional experience section, let's focus on the post-college, full-time, real kind of jobs. Now, there are caveats to that though. If you had a really, really interesting internship that is going to be a value add to your resume, maybe it was even the job you ended up getting post-college, then we do sometimes see internships referenced. If they were internships that were interesting but kind of unrelated, maybe that's something you put down in that bottom section. It might not be worthwhile to give it too much real estate up in the proper professional section. Maybe it goes in the additional section. We were talking with Borjan about, a bolded word, awards, and then tab in and fill in the line, or certifications or international. Internships could be another word that goes there, and then you could say what that interesting internship was. Beyond that, I mean, unless you had like in high school, if you do something like so interesting, unique, magnificent, it could get this like kind of one-line mention as well. It would have to be, I think, really pretty interesting to include it from high school. Like I'm talking about like, I founded an NGO. We're not talking about like I worked at a summer camp or something like that. So that's, I think, hopefully helpful there. Should we include smaller jobs like TA or greater positions? I think so, within a college section. Not a ton of real estate. I wouldn't think of it as like a job. I'd almost think of it more as like a one-line bullet potentially under your college experience. And I don't know that you really, if you're going into 2 lines there, unless it was something really pretty interesting, to justify 2 lines feels like a lot. But 1 line, teaching assistant. What was the course? How many students? That could be worthwhile. Because by the way, in MBA programs, a lot of people take TA jobs, teaching assistant jobs. So that could be relevant and show something there. So that's how I would think about that question. What if we don't have data points to show the impact of the work? For example, how much revenue generated? We mentioned the data point. What can be used as a source to prove it? Okay, 2 parts to this question. First part, you're not always going to have data points. So that's a little bit tough. You kind of have to take it on a case-by-case basis. Again, there's probably kind of a hierarchy here as well. At the top of the hierarchy, you're going to have situations where the impact is really obvious and really quantifiable. Then after that, you're going to have situations where it's less obvious or less immediately quantifiable, and you have to look for opportunities to articulate or at least express or convey things in other ways. Maybe it's deal size, maybe it's revenue generated, like by your company, not change for the client or something, if you're allowed to share that. Maybe it's number of users or number of people affected. You'll look for other opportunities to convey size and scale. By the way, if it's like really, really minor and you think it's going to undermine the quality of the bullet, like maybe you look for other opportunities to qualitatively express things. And finally, then too, by the way, speaking of qualitatively, if you can't quantify it, if you can't quantify the impact, Qualify it, meaning express it qualitatively. Think about, what did it enable? What was the before and after? What changed? What was reinvented? What can people have access to or do now that they couldn't do before? So that's the first part. And if we mention a data point, what can be used as a source to prove it? I think your own, these are not getting like it's not like somebody's going like fact checking these like they would for like a research report. You have your ethics, your recommenders are going to talk about probably these projects as well. So things should obviously be consistent between those. You should not mislead on resumes. You should just, say what it was. People are, like I said, it's not a research report. People are going to be scrutinizing every reference you make. But honesty, consistency, and so forth are the way to go. Last question for today. Should we include titles such as MD, PhD, PMP, or PE after our name at the top of the resume? Interesting question. I think in some cases, yes. It probably depends on what that title is. Off the top of my head here, MD and PhD, I'm going to go with yes there. It's a little bit of personal preference too, though. I think, we could go down the line. MD, I think, MD and PhD, I would include it. There's no hard rules on this, by the way. They're going to see elsewhere that you're a doctorate, that you completed med school, that you have a doctorate or a PhD in something else. I think from a point of differentiation standpoint, though, MD and PhD do jump out at me as different, unique, really different, really unique in the landscape of MBA program. I think back to my own class at Berkeley Haas, my own MBA class at Berkeley Haas. I believe we had one MD. It's a class of 260 people at the time, smaller kind of class, but we had maybe one MD and one PhD in the class. I think that is differentiating and interesting for those two in particular. I probably would lean toward yes up there for that. PMP, if you really like it, they're going to see it later on. My gut would lean away from it. But again, you can even see me thinking through this speaks to that it's not like a hard and fast rule or, gospel that you have to do it one way or the other. I think it's kind of case by case and that sort of thing. So let's leave it there. By the way, too, not to go on a final tangent, but just to close things out, if you are an MD or a PhD, or you have had these extra kind of degrees or amounts of experience, just make sure it's clear why you're now, this is true for everybody, but perhaps even more so if you're later stage of your career, if you're a doctor, if you're a PhD, if you are really, really deep into your field and are perhaps even outside the norm, therefore, for a full-time MBA program, there's going to be an even bigger onus on you to explain why MBA, why now. So just make sure that that's clear. How does being a doctor, for everyone, bigger onus in this case, how does who I am and what I've done in the past, plus the MBA, lead to or enable my very, very specific goals that I'm articulating in various parts of these applications, interviews, and essays? So how does that, you've been a doctor you went to med school, that took a long time. You are maybe a little older now than the typical full-time MBA candidate. Why MBA? Why now? You're already a doctor. You're a PhD, you're an expert in your field. How does this all fit together? How does who I am and what I've done in the past plus the MBA lead to or enable my goals? So let's leave it there for today with a big thank you to our 4 participants for putting themselves out there, putting their resumes on screen, and making themselves vulnerable in that way. But for the benefit of everybody, I know it's a lot of detail, drinking from the proverbial fire hose, but hopefully beneficial. It's up on the screen there, but if you'd like to have a free consultation with Avanti Prep, the link is there, avantiprep.com. You'll see where you can sign up for a free consultation. But we wish everyone the best of luck and the best of editing and the best of going through your resumes and your essays and all the different steps and parts of this process over the next few weeks and months and beyond. Thank you for your time today.